She had more than 500,000 people watching her live the dream, and she couldn't get out of bed. That woman is Jess Sowards, the face of Roots and Refuge Farm, one of the most beloved homesteading channels on YouTube. For years, she was the person everyone pointed to as proof that the simple life was possible. The garden, the animals, the big family, the faith, all of it playing out beautifully on screen. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand exactly what it cost her to build that picture, what she was carrying the entire time, and the quiet reckoning that finally changed everything. Jess didn't grow up anywhere near a farm. She was raised in Sherwood, Arkansas, a suburb, sidewalks, neighbors, a backyard that was good for maybe a garden tomato. Her husband, Maya, grew up in a rural setting and knew what real farm work looked like from the time he was a kid. Jess knew what she wanted it to look like from the inside of a catalog. That distinction matters. She wasn't born into this world. She chose it deliberately out of a longing she carried from childhood that she couldn't fully explain. While other girls her age were reading fashion magazines, Jess was flipping through livestock catalogs. She had an uncle who raised chickens and kept a pig, and those visits lit something in her that never went out. She loved animals, she loved books about farms, and she knew somewhere deep down that the suburban life was a placeholder. The problem was money. She and Maya had very little of it. They were in ministry. Maya worked outside the home. Jess stayed home with the kids and built a small photography business on the side. A farm felt not just distant, but practically impossible. Even something modest, 4 or 5 acres, was a financial stretch that seemed unreachable for years. Her path to the farm started, in her own words, in the kitchen. Her son Asher was born with significant food allergies, and for the first time in her life, Jess started reading labels. She discovered dairy was in things she'd never considered. She started cooking from scratch. She started thinking about where food came from and who controlled it. That shift, from convenience to intentionality, was the seed that everything else grew from. And if you think it took years to get where she wanted to go, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The first property was a foreclosure on 5 acres near Valonia, Arkansas. It wasn't the picture-perfect homestead she had imagined. It needed work, but it was land, and it was theirs. Jess admitted she had an idyllic version of what farm life would look like. The reality was a steep learning curve with animals she had barely been around, and a soil that had no history with her yet. Maya had grown up working land. She was starting from scratch as an adult. She kept shooting photos to help pay the bills. The farm was being built in parallel with a career that had nothing to do with it. Then came the YouTube channel. She started it somewhere around 2016. The early videos were garden tours, farm updates, the slow documentation of a family learning how to grow their own food. She was warm on camera. She talked to viewers the way she'd talk to a neighbor over a fence. Gardeners, she discovered, are patient people, willing to sit with her for 30 minutes or more while she walked them through what worked and what didn't. The comment section started filling up with people who felt like they'd found someone who made the whole thing feel possible. Then YouTube's algorithm found her. About 4 years after she started posting, the platform promoted the channel. The numbers moved fast. Subscribers poured in from around the world. There's a detail here that captures how surreal it became. The farm catalogs she used to read as a young girl started printing her face in their pages. She was no longer just a suburban woman playing farm. She was the face of a movement. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. What most of Jess's viewers didn't fully understand was that by the time the channel was thriving, the farm had become a media operation. She said it plainly herself eventually. Content creation and the businesses built around it, courses, books, Patreon, partnerships, were what made the farm financially possible. The garden, the goats, the chickens, the life she documented so beautifully was sustained in large part by the audience watching it. That's not a criticism. It's the reality of how the modern homestead economy works, but it creates a pressure that most viewers never see. She published her first book, The First-Time Gardener, Growing Vegetables, in March 2021. A second book, The First-Time Homesteader, followed in September 2022. Both sold well. The brand was growing. Cool Springs Press had approached her about the first title. They came to her. Around that same time, the family made a significant move. They packed up from the 5-acre property in Arkansas and relocated to 27 acres in the Midlands of South Carolina. 700 miles, raw land, no barn, minimal fencing, utilities not yet connected. She described building it from nothing, going from 0 cattle to 5 in a matter of months, constructing a barn, establishing gardens where there had been none. It was an enormous undertaking done publicly, with an audience watching every step. From the outside, it looked like the dream scaling up. From the inside, well, Jess hadn't said yet, but she would. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now. July 2024. Jess found herself in bed for 3 days, not from illness, not from a single dramatic event, from accumulation. She described it in her own words as overcommitment and foolish optimism catching up with her at once. There was the relentless demand of the garden in July heat, a full month of travel just ending. Her family gathered all at once in the house, which should have been a joy, and partly was, except that she was already running on fumes. Then came a string of losses, the decision to cull a dairy cow she had cared for, losing a young goat, hearing that a cousin had died. She wrote about it afterward. She said she was caught in the middle of life and death and realized she was too tired to care about much at all. She took her own advice, the advice she gave freely to her audience, and rested. But that rest period cracked something open. The image she had been presenting was one of abundant, purposeful farm life. And that life was real. She was genuinely living it. But the pace at which she was living it, and the pressure to document it, and the expectations the audience had built around it, had quietly consumed something. She had been building the life she dreamed of. She had also been building it partly for other people. And those two things had started to pull in different directions. She never talked about this publicly. Until now. The public version of the reckoning came in February 2025. She returned to her podcast after a significant break and opened the season differently. Gone was the usual enthusiasm. What she offered instead was honesty. She told her listeners that over the previous several months, she and Maya had made big shifts, not just to the farm, but to the way they were living their entire lives. They had downsized the farm deliberately. The dairy operation, which had been a significant part of the channel's identity, was scaled back. They brought all of their kids home for homeschooling, pulling them out of school as part of a broader choice to slow down. She talked about humble pie, the kind that comes from admitting that what you thought you wanted and what you built in pursuit of it wasn't quite right. She said something that likely landed hard on longtime viewers. In chasing big dreams, it's easy to drift off course. The farm had been built in part to meet expectations that weren't entirely their own. They had taken a hard look at what was serving their family and what was simply too much. That phrase, too much, from a woman whose entire brand had been built on doing more, growing more, teaching more, sharing more, carried real weight. And it pointed toward something even deeper that she hadn't yet said out loud. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. In December 2025, Jess released a podcast episode she described as a tender one. She talked about fertility treatments. She and Maya had been going through them. There had been hope. There had been loss. She spoke about holding an open heart through treatments and grief and surrender, about trusting her faith with desires she said she could not carry on her own. She talked about what it had been like to hold that privately while her older children were stepping into young adulthood. Two things happening at once, the family expanding in one direction and falling short in another. This was not something she had discussed publicly while it was happening. Her audience had watched the farm through seasons of growth and setback. But this, the deeply personal physical and emotional weight she and Maya had been carrying for an unspecified period of time, had stayed private. The timing matters. She had turned 40 in November 2022. The years that followed, the South Carolina move, the scale-up, the exhaustion of 2024, the reset of early 2025, and finally this disclosure, form a single arc. A woman entering her 40s, staring down the gap between the life she was performing and the one she actually wanted, and choosing to close it. She didn't just slow the farm down, she rebuilt it around what was true. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The homesteading world has a particular mythology around it. The story goes, leave the suburbs, grow your food, simplify everything, get closer to the land and to each other. It's a compelling story because it's partly true. Jess Sowards lived it. The garden is real, the family is real, the faith is real, but the part the mythology leaves out is the performance of it. When the channel is the income, the farm is also the set. The bad days, the exhaustion, the grief, the fertility treatments, the private cost of building something enormous in public, none of that fits cleanly in a garden tour. Jess had built something genuinely meaningful. She had also built a machine that required constant feeding, and for a while she fed it at the expense of things that mattered more. The 27-acre South Carolina property wasn't just a bigger farm, it was also a bigger promise to the audience, to the algorithm, to a version of herself she wasn't entirely sure she still recognized. The cows, the dairy operation, the courses, the books, all of it stacked up into something that, in July 2024, put her in bed for 3 days and eventually forced a reckoning she had probably seen coming for longer than she admitted. The subscribers she'd earned, the books with her face on the cover, the catalogs she'd once read as a daydreaming girl in the suburbs. All of it real, all of it genuinely achieved. And still somehow not quite the thing. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. Jess Sowards built the life that millions of people were dreaming about, and then had to take it apart, quietly, piece by piece, to find the version she could actually live. She's still on the farm, still posting, still teaching. The podcast is active, the Substack is growing, and the vision of a learning center remains somewhere in the future of what Roots and Refuge becomes. But the model has changed. The kids are home. The dairy operation is smaller. The content is slower. And for the first time in a long time, she says she has peace. The fertility treatments, the burnout, the public admission that the dream had partially become a performance, none of it undoes what she built. But it changes how you understand it. Do you think the version of farm life Jess was building before 2024 was sustainable? Or do you think most content creators in this space are quietly running the same race toward the same wall? The version of Roots and Refuge Farm that exists now is quieter, smaller, in a physical sense. Deliberately so. The dairy herd is scaled back. The kids are home. The pace of content has shifted toward depth rather than volume. The podcast continues, updated weekly, and the episodes have taken on a more reflective quality. Less, here's how to grow tomatoes. More, here's what I've been sitting with this summer, she writes on Substack. The Patreon community still gets access. The YouTube channel still posts. But the orientation has shifted. She talked about choosing slow and quiet in a world demanding fast and loud. She talked about the nervous system and trauma, and the way people try to bully their way into peace instead of nurturing it. These are not the topics of a channel still performing the dream. These are the topics of someone who has come through something and is speaking from the other side of it. There is also the Learning Center. Jess has spoken about a long-term vision, a place where people can come to learn from teachers about everything from hobby gardening to regenerative agriculture. That dream is still alive. It just looks different now. Slower, more rooted, built on what's actually sustainable rather than what photographs well for the platform. The suburban girl who read farm catalogs got her farm. She got the audience, the books, the recognition, the land. And then she had to do the harder thing, figure out which parts of it were hers and which parts she had been tending for everyone else. She chose, and she kept choosing.